The Portuguese fleet floated like ghosts at the edge of Malacca's horizon. Massive carracks, armed to the teeth, but completely blind. The strait in front of them was a maze of shifting sandbars, razor-sharp reefs, and monsoon currents that snapped wooden hulls like twigs. Local sailors joked that even birds got lost here. But the Portuguese weren't laughing. They'd crossed half the world, chasing a dream of spices, pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and wealth powerful enough to rewrite kingdoms. And now, after years of failure, they were stuck. A few wrong turns, and the ocean would bury them. Then a canoe appeared. One man paddled toward the flagship, ignoring shouted warnings. A Malaccan pilot, rough clothes, salt in his beard, eyes sharp with calculations. He claimed he knew every hidden channel, every seasonal wind, every merchant path that kept Malacca rich, and he said he could guide them. Why? He didn't explain. He didn't bow. He just stepped aboard and said a sentence that changed history. "Your maps are lies. Follow me if you want the real ones." The Portuguese captain exchanged looks with his officers. Suspicion, greed, fear, but desperation won. They let him in. And right there, on a ship that shouldn't survive the week, Southeast Asia's greatest betrayal began. To understand the weight of what this man did, you need to understand Malacca. It wasn't just a port. It was the artery of Asian trade. If a ship wanted to move spices between India, Indonesia, China, or Arabia, it passed through Malacca. And those waters belonged to the Sultanate. The city lived off information. Which winds merchant captains waited for, which shoals moved every year, which channels were safe during storms. A navigator here wasn't just a sailor. He was a keeper of national secrets. And this pilot? He was one of the best. Born in a port-side kampong, trained since childhood to read monsoon rhythms the way others read prayer books, he rose to become a trusted navigator for merchant fleets. But in a system where nobles hogged rewards and commoners watched gold sail past them, skill didn't guarantee status. He knew he was valuable. The Sultanate didn't. The Portuguese, however, were different. They didn't want hierarchy. They didn't want stability. They wanted advantage. That's why the moment the pilot unrolled the Portuguese charts and laughed, actually laughed, they listened. He tapped the parchment with the back of his finger. "You sailed around Africa for this? Tap. This coast doesn't exist. Tap. This channel will kill you." The captain's pride cracked. They needed him. The pilot pointed eastward. "Turn here during the night. I'll show you the path your enemies pray you never find." That line alone was enough to hook every man on board. Their first move together was small, a nighttime shift across seemingly calm water. The Portuguese didn't realize how dangerous it was until they heard the grinding roar of reefs on both sides. The ship slid between death as if pulled by fate. But it wasn't fate. It was the pilot's memory of currents, shadows, and the smell of the tide. When the flagship emerged into open water, untouched, the captain knew two things. 1. This pilot was the real key to the Indies. 2. They could never let him go back home. Because here's the brutal truth. Malacca wasn't just rich. It was untouchable because outsiders couldn't navigate its world. If someone broke that barrier, even slightly, the entire trading order could collapse. And that's exactly what the pilot was now doing, piece by piece. He whispered about seasonal winds merchants waited months for. He revealed which islands held fresh water. He showed the Portuguese where rival traders anchored during the monsoon. Every detail was a cut in Malacca's armor. The Portuguese didn't question his motives anymore. Some believed he was greedy. Others thought he hated the Sultanate's elite. A few suspected he simply wanted to trade loyalty for a future. But none of them knew the truth. Not yet. Because guiding them past reefs was just the beginning. The real betrayal hadn't started. If this already shocked you, wait for what happens next. The Portuguese woke before sunrise to find the pilot already on deck. No greetings, no explanations, just a firm instruction. Turn north. The tide favors you for 1 hour. They obeyed. What followed didn't feel human. The pilot threaded their ships through reefs locals feared, and Europeans didn't even know existed. He navigated by scent, by wind pressure, by the way the swell rolled under the keel. Every correction he made saved minutes. Every shortcut he revealed saved lives. But he wasn't done. Once the fleet reached deeper waters, he pointed to a thin line of islands barely visible. That is where the Arab merchants anchor during storms. Follow them, and you enter the real spice routes. The officers exchanged glances. Until now, Europeans saw only surface trade. What the pilot was describing was the hidden world beneath it. Supply lanes, emergency havens, secret monsoon shelters, knowledge that took generations to build. And he was giving all of it away. The Portuguese didn't question him. They were too intoxicated by progress. For years they had wandered the Indian Ocean like blind men. Now they were whisper close to a network, so profitable it built kingdoms and destroyed them. Still, something felt too easy, too clean. One night, a cabin boy swore he saw the pilot scribbling symbols into a small wooden tablet, then tossing the shavings into the sea. Another officer overheard him muttering old Malay prayers mixed with foreign names. Rumors spread. Was he a defector? A spy? A man settling a personal score? No one dared ask. The pilot kept feeding them secrets. He told them which harbors were shallow enough to trap larger ships. He listed the Sultanate's patrol schedules by memory. He mapped currents that carried cargo faster than sails ever could. Every revelation tightened the noose around Malacca. By the third week, the Portuguese captain finally grasped the scale of what this man was doing. He wasn't just guiding them. He was dismantling his own kingdom brick by brick, without hesitation, without remorse. But betrayal never stays invisible forever. Back in Malacca, merchants began whispering. A fleet as foreign as Portugal should have crashed a dozen times by now. Yet it navigated like a local convoy. Some believed the Portuguese had captured a navigator. Others suspected something worse, someone willingly helping them. The Sultanate sent patrols to investigate strange sightings near the reefs. They found nothing, but the fear spread. Meanwhile, the pilot led the Portuguese into waters he had never shown another living soul. A narrow passage cutting through the coral forest of the Rio Linga archipelago. A route so valuable that traders protected it with myths and ghost stories to hide its existence. When the Portuguese slipped through that corridor untouched, they realized they were now deep inside the trade empire Malacca had guarded for centuries. No European ship had ever come this far. The captain confronted the pilot privately. "Why help us?" The pilot didn't flinch. Because Malacca has forgotten, who does the real work? The nobles feast, the sailors drown. I am choosing the side that pays what I'm worth. It wasn't anger. It wasn't ideology. It was cold arithmetic. He believed loyalty should follow opportunity, not tradition. A captain nodded, but didn't trust him. A man willing to betray once could betray again. Still, he needed him. The fleet was now too deep into unknown waters to navigate without his mind. The tension grew. Whenever the pilot wasn't on deck, officers watched him. When he slept, men whispered about slit throats and contingency plans. But no one dared act. Not yet. Not when the next channel could kill them without him. Then the breakthrough came. The fleet reached the Banda Sea, the heart of cloves. The place European monarchs dreamed of but never touched. As the Portuguese prepared to anchor, the pilot gave them one final revelation. You think spices grow randomly? They don't. The Sultanate controls the flow. I will show you the pattern. That pattern wasn't just a map. It was a weapon. With it, Portugal could strike trade routes at their weakest points. They could bypass Malacca entirely. They could dominate the ocean. The officers stared at him with a mix of awe and fear. They realized something brutal. They didn't just gain a guide. They gained the blueprint to break an empire. If you're enjoying this, you'll want to hear the twist that's coming. The Portuguese fleet returned toward Malacca, armed with knowledge no outsider had ever possessed. They weren't guessing anymore. They weren't exploring. They were hunting. And the pilot led them straight toward the target he once swore to protect. Malacca still had no idea what was coming. The Sultanate saw sails on the horizon and assumed it was another attempt at negotiation, maybe another round of threats. They had faced foreigners before. They weren't intimidated. After all, the strait was their fortress. Outsiders always lost here, but this time the invaders knew every sandbank, every tide, every blind corner where patrol boats hid. They approached the harbor like a local fleet returning from trade. For the first time in its history, Malacca's geography wasn't a shield. It was a trap, and the Portuguese knew the exits. As the fleet anchored, the pilot stood silent at the bow, watching the walls of his city rise from the water. He felt no regret, no hesitation, just a cold recognition of what came next. The captain approached him. "Is this the point of no return?" The pilot didn't look away from the shoreline. "I crossed that the moment I stepped onto your ship." The assault began with terrifying precision. Portuguese cannons dug into the harbor defenses, at angles only a Malaccan navigator should have known. Every shot found a weakness in the walls. Every landing point matched the pilot's warnings about guard rotations and blind spots. Inside the city, chaos erupted. Malaccan commanders watched European ships maneuver with impossible accuracy. They turned sharply in currents only locals understood. They positioned themselves to cut off reinforcements at choke points no foreigner should know existed. It didn't feel like an invasion. It felt like someone had rewired the city and handed the blueprints to the enemy. Troops shouted that there must be a traitor. Captains demanded to know who leaked the routes. But by the time they realized the truth, the Portuguese were already inside. The battle turned fast and vicious. Malaccan fighters resisted fiercely, but their strategies relied on geography. And geography had just been stolen. By dusk, the Sultanate's defenses cracked. In the smoke and screams, the pilot walked the deck unnoticed, staring at the burning skyline of a city he had once sailed proudly under. Men who knew the strait better than anyone were now dying, because he had given away the one advantage they relied on. The Portuguese captain joined him again, this time with a different tone. "It's done. Malacca will fall." The pilot answered without emotion. "It fell the moment you learned the currents." The captain studied him. Something had changed. The pilot wasn't proud. He wasn't guilty. He looked empty, like he had spent everything already. The moment the last stronghold collapsed, the Portuguese celebrated. Bells rang. Guns fired in triumph. Officers toasted the navigator who made it all possible. And then the mood shifted. They didn't need him anymore. A man who could betray one master could betray another. A man who carried the keys to an empire was a threat once those keys were copied. The next morning, the pilot was summoned. No ceremony. No reward. Just a short, cold conversation with men who now spoke to him like he was cargo. "Your service is complete." He realized what that meant. The Portuguese didn't execute him publicly. They didn't imprison him. They did something worse. They erased him. His name vanished from official logs. His contributions vanished from reports. His existence became an inconvenient detail to hide. By the time Malacca rebuilt under foreign rule, the Sultanate's people whispered stories about a traitor navigator whose greed opened the gates. But they never knew his real name. And the Portuguese made sure history didn't either. He lived out the rest of his life in anonymity, drifting through ports where no one recognized him, carrying the weight of an empire's fall that he caused but never got credit for. Malacca's trade world was reshaped. Europe's dominance surged. The spice routes changed forever. And the man who set it all in motion disappeared into silence. One navigator, one decision, the collapse of a kingdom. If you want more stories like this, you know what to do.